Today, we're tackling a fascinating and honestly, a pretty tricky question. How do you actually measure an idea? I mean, it seems impossible, right? But it turns out there are ways to do it. And understanding them is absolutely key to understanding progress itself. So let's just ask it straight up. How do you measure a great idea? Is it how clever it is, how much money it makes, maybe how many lives it changes? This is the big question we're going to unpack today. Because, if you can't measure it, how can you possibly manage it? And look, this isn't just some brainy puzzle for economists. Getting a handle on how to measure innovation is critical for policymakers trying to boost their economies, for businesses that need to stay competitive, and really for all of us to understand what's pushing society forward. Put simply, new ideas are the engine of growth. All right, so where do we even begin with this? Well, one of the most logical places to start is by looking at the ingredients. The resources we pour into what you could call the innovation machine. Let's start with the inputs. The most common input measure, by a long shot, is research and development, or as you probably know it, R&D. This is the formal, systematic work that companies and countries do to find new knowledge, and then, hopefully, turn that knowledge into something useful. You can think of it as the fuel for the innovation engine. And here's where things get really, really interesting. When you look at how much countries spend on R&D as a slice of their entire economy, you see this huge gap. Experts even call it the innovation divide. Some countries are investing a ton, while others are lagging way behind. It just goes to show how differently a commitment to innovation can look across the globe. But is just throwing money at the problem the whole story? Not quite. The great thing about using R&D as a metric is that it shows a real commitment. The downside? Well, there's absolutely no guarantee that all that spending will lead to a breakthrough. I mean, think about industries like pharmaceuticals. It can sometimes take decades to see any return on that investment. Okay, so if R&D is what you put in, what about what comes out? Well, that brings us to our second method, which is all about counting the concrete, tangible results of all that hard work and research. And the numbers here are just staggering. In one recent year, the world saw about 3.4 million patent applications filed. A patent is basically the government giving you a temporary monopoly on your invention. It's really our main way of officially recognizing a brand new, useful idea. So, where is all this invention actually happening? This table gives us a pretty clear picture. You can see a heavy concentration of patenting activity in a few key economic hubs. It's almost like a geographic map of where new technologies are being born and officially registered. But again, we have to ask, are patents a perfect yardstick? On the one hand, yeah, they represent something that's genuinely new and valuable enough to protect legally. But the big drawback is that not everything gets patented. Some companies rely on trade secrets, and a whole lot of innovation, like a brilliant new business process, can't be patented at all. And hey, patents aren't the only game in town when it comes to outputs. We can also track scientific publications to see advances in fundamental knowledge. Or we could look at trademarks, which tell us about new products and services hitting the market. Each one of these gives us a slightly different piece of that big innovation puzzle. So we've looked at what goes in and what comes out. But what if we tried something a little more direct? What if we just asked? That brings us to our third method, innovation surveys. A fantastic example of this in action is Europe's Community Innovation Survey. Instead of messing around with proxies like spending or patents, they go straight to the source. They literally ask thousands of companies, hey, are you innovating? How are you doing it? Who are you working with? What's getting in your way? Now, the power of surveys is pretty obvious, right? They can capture all those softer things that R&D spending and patents totally miss. But there's a catch. You're relying on people's subjective answers, so the data is only as good as the responses you get. Plus, doing these huge surveys is incredibly expensive and takes a ton of time. All right, this leads us to our final, and honestly, our most ambitious method. Trying to roll everything we've talked about and more into a single, all-encompassing score. This is where composite indices come in. So how on earth do you build one of these things? It sounds super complicated, but it's really a four-step recipe. First, you gather data on dozens of different things: R&D, patents, the number of science grads, you name it. Then, you have to standardize all that data so you're not comparing apples and oranges. Step 3, you decide how much weight each factor gets. And finally, you crunch it all together to get one big number. And just to give you a peek under the hood, these things are complex. An index like the European Innovation Scoreboard doesn't just look at one or two things. It groups tons of indicators into these broad categories to try and capture the entire innovation ecosystem, from a country's education system all the way to the final impact on jobs and company sales. You know the drill by now. Is this a perfect measure? Well, the appeal is obvious. A single number is awesome for headlines and for ranking countries. But that simplicity is also its biggest weakness. A high score can easily hide some serious problems under the surface, and that final number is super sensitive to the choices made by the people who built the index in the first place.
Okay, let's take a breath. We've gone through inputs, outputs, surveys, and these big, complicated scores. Each one has its strengths, for sure, but every single one gives us an incomplete picture. So, what's the right way to do it?
The real answer is that there is no single right answer. The best approach is to use a full toolkit. R&D spending shows us commitment. Patents help us track inventions. Surveys tell us what's actually happening on the ground. And those big indices give us a nice summary. You really have to look at them all together to get a clear, meaningful picture. So that's pretty much the state of the art today. But it leaves us with one last, and I think really exciting question. What's next? How can we get an even better, faster, and more accurate picture of innovation? The future might just lie in big data. I mean, imagine being able to track innovation almost in real time just by analyzing millions of company websites for new product launches or scanning job postings for R&D roles. We could even track social media to see how people feel about new technologies. This could really help us overcome the delays and biases in our current methods. And that's our whirlwind tour of the complex art of measuring an idea. If you want to dive deeper into this stuff, the information we covered today comes from reports by the OECD, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and the European Commission. Thanks for tuning in.